I'm going to go ahead and get started. Some of you may know, my name is Julia. I'm the Education Coordinator here at Big Sky Film Institute. And this is our final Native Filmmaker Initiative Film Club for the school year. Up until we have our filmmakers in the schools, we do a few other screenings with Inspired Classroom. But this is our final film club, and we're really excited. Today we are going to talk about the film Metal Road. Some of you may have seen it, some of you may have not seen it yet, but we do have producer Saradel Sarandi. Is that how you say your last name?
It's Sarand. My name is Saradel Sarand.
Sarand, sorry. And she's the filmmaker and the producer on the film. And we also have Indian education specialist Mike Jetty with us today, and both of them are going to help us kind of form a discussion around the film, the craft of it, the content, and Native and Indigenous issues and our history, which is going to be fun. So we're going to kind of start things off. I'm going to have Saradel maybe introduce yourself, and if you could just tell us a little bit about how you first got involved in the subject of this film. If some of the students haven't seen it, it might be good to have a few sentence synopsis of what it is about. We'll show a little film clip of it also to jot your memory, and we can kind of go from there. So Saradel, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yat kwasina she Saradel Saran yinisha sinajini nishna bilagana bashichin akiani dashache bilagana dashna akut ego son dinestan ashanagi. I am from Flagstaff, Arizona, and I am Navajo. I grew up on the reservation and then moved to a border town in Flagstaff. Border town is, sort of close proximity to the reservation, and I grew up in a time when it's sort of like in this transition from like the boarding school generation to the new sort of starting to take pride in your culture. Sorry, that's the snow removal. I'm in Montreal, so I'm. let me explain. So I'm Navajo. I met my husband, who is a Mi'kmaq filmmaker, lives in Canada, and so I live in Montreal, and they plow the streets here. And I have a dog here. She gets really upset when she hears the plow or someone comes, so you have to bear with me. She starts grumbling. Okay, this is Harley, everybody. This is Harley. She's named after Harley Quinn, the little Batman character. So I moved to Montreal from Arizona. Grew up in this border town where the train went right through the community. Did not know anything about the workers, didn't know anything about the train systems. All I knew was loud and it was going through the town. And you would see trains, carts after carts going by, not knowing anything. And so after an accident happened that took the life of a loved one, and there was the cleanup after the accident, and I realized that there are actually people who maintain the railroads. There are people who go out there and change the tracks, that change the lights, that change the ballasts. And there's this whole world, this whole invisible, unseen world exists. And that's what got me interested in it, was realizing that there are these invisible workers that I knew nothing about. And I grew up right here with this town and the train going through, I don't know, maybe 30 times a day, and never thinking twice about it. So this film, it's called Metal Road in Navajo. That's Beshpatin, which means metal road, literal translation. That's why you say the railroad in Navajo, Beshpatin. And so I wanted to find out more about these workers, and I wanted to find out more about what it's like to be a railroad worker, because that was a very foreign concept to me. I knew construction. My brother's a construction worker. I knew other types of labor, but I didn't know there was actually railroad labor. And then when I looked more into it, my mind was blown by what I discovered. So that would be kind of sort of an overall introduction is just wanting to find out more about these laborers that come from our reservation, that leave our homeland, and then come back. And they've been doing it for generations. They'd leave, go and work for, weeks, months on end, and then return. And this sort of continuous source of work was really important. And you see in the stories, you see in these people, it's a lot of sacrifice. There's emotional, physical, and sort of spiritual sacrifices that these individuals are doing just to maintain the railroad, just to maintain it, so that we can get our TVs and get stuff shipped across the country. And then there's a whole element of the historical development of the railroad, but we can get into that a little bit later. So that's really about it, is that the trains and the creation of reservations, that is a huge part of our identity as Indigenous people. And this is just like one aspect that I didn't think that anybody was paying attention to.
Yeah, I think that's especially with railroads. I'm curious if there's any, I think a lot of people think of railroads as trains and riding in the train as far as transport, but there's a lot of it is we're transporting materials or goods, and I'm curious if anybody in any of the classes, have you ever ridden a train, or do you have a railroad in your town or that passes through?
Hi, guys. Somebody tell him the whole class.
The whole class rode a train.
Oh, the whole class rode the train. Okay, thank you.
Tell him that the train comes through our town.
Someone else can do that. The train comes through
Here,
our town.
Anthony, you can tell
The
him.
train comes through town.
Yes, thank you, Anthony. Okay, great. How about Fraser? Anybody there rode the train, Fraser? Yeah?
I'm not. Anybody train? I sleep near a train track. Marco, have you been on a train? You ever been on a train? Oh, yeah. Go one point to Glasgow, come on.
Great. Okay, thank you. And that was a good test of our microphones to make sure everything's working.
That was. Thank you guys for that feedback. I think after watching this film, I was surprised. I think we're all familiar with trains. We've ridden a train, but I wasn't super familiar with how much maintenance goes into keeping the tracks working and keeping those trains on schedule. And we are about to watch a clip, for those of you that weren't able to watch the film, from Sarah Dell's film, to kind of give us a little bit of background, maybe a refresher on what we've just watched. And before we watch it, I want you guys, in order to think of some good questions and to get a little more involved, can everybody take out a piece of paper? We did this activity for those of you that participated in the last film club, but I think it was really helpful. So if everyone can take a piece of paper and fold it in half, and then on one side, maybe on the left side, I want you to write "I notice" at the top of the page. And on the right side, I want you to write "I wonder." And on the left side, on the "I notice" side, I want you to think about some observations that you make from this about 4 or 5 minute clip that we're about to watch. Maybe ask yourself what you learn about the individuals that are interviewed. What is important to them? Why might I have shown this clip? Why is the information important? As Sarah Dell says, why are these people so-called invisible, and why do we not think of the work and maintenance that goes into these jobs? What do you learn about life as a railroad trackman? Is this happening now? What part of it is in the past? They're all really good things to be asking yourself, and really experienced filmmakers ask themselves these questions as they're making a film. So think of yourselves as like novice filmmakers in the making.
Can I just add something about this particular crew? So there's lots of different crews, and this film is about one particular crew called the 9001 Heavy Steel Gang, and they're the largest in the country. They were about 120 men, and it used to be that they would all go in one large group. So this one large group of like 100+ men would cruise into town, and then they would repair the roads. But they've split them up. So this particular gang, it doesn't exist like this anymore. They're smaller. They're 2 smaller groups. So we filmed them during the time when they were still working together as one large group. And so this is like one winter work day that they're going through. So that's what I wanted to show, was just this. It's the largest Native American gang, predominantly, meaning like most of the gang is made up of Navajos. And so that's really amazing that most of these railroad workers are Navajo railroad workers. So that's what I wanted to be able to at least show, is that's what this clip is hopefully going to show.
Yeah, and that's a great point, and it brings me to your I wonder side of your page as you write notes and think of good questions as we discuss the clip. I want you to ask yourself why it's important that this story is told in the context of the Navajo Nation, Navajo workers, and that this is an Indian perspective, a Native American perspective. So we're going to start this clip. It's about 4 or 5 minutes long. Keep some good notes. We will circle back around and continue this conversation in a few moments.
People power shortage. So what the government did was it made an agreement on behalf of the railroads with the country of Mexico. 125,000 Mexican workers came up and worked on the railroads during World War II. At the end of the war, there was a lot of pushback because there was a lot of fear among Americans there wouldn't be enough jobs for returning service people. And so all those Mexican workers were deported back to Mexico from the United States. But then there's a question about who was going to do this track work. And it was then that came up through the Railroad Retirement Board to form what I call a paternalistic triangle between the railroads, the Railroad Retirement Board, which is one of the government agencies that covers railroad workers, and the folks who ran the trading posts. The problem, of course, was that Navajos themselves had no say in this, and when the railroad would need some workers, they would call the RRB. The RRB would call a trading post, and the words that were used were, "Go round us up some Navajos."
It was mostly my mom that brought us up, but my dad was at work. Worked for the Union Pacific, the Santa Fe. Usually back in those days, it was only like 6 months job, mostly during the summer. I had about 6, 7, about 8 cousins that worked for the railroad, 9001, from the supervisor all the way down to labor. No, don't get no more ideas. Hurry up, I'm out of here. Right now we got Valentino, Virgil, Junior, and me working on one. When I go back to the railroad, I try to find all the tools I can buy, like air hammers and drills and whatnot. This is gonna be the family room and kitchen on that side. Those 2 are for my grandkids, the 2 granddaughters I have that are kind of living with me right now. Mom goes to school at UNM. She's trying to get a certificate so nobody take care of them. Some people don't even know they're grandkids. They follow me everywhere. This one's not even walking, wants to crawl after me, wants to follow me. But this is what I'm working for. It takes me back to the railroad and trying to finish this house. This is something that I kind of like, I'm proud of it. Same time, be for my grandkids, I try to leave them something. You can't leave money all the time. All right, last minute. There you go.
I've been Mississippi, down through New Orleans.
We'll go through Albuquerque. off at Trinidad and go to Lyman straight up to Brush, Colorado. And then it's only about 15 miles to Sterling.
Rambling man, don't fool around with a rambling man. Left the girl up there with that green grass.
All right, that was a great clip. So as we kind of dive back into conversation, I think a great discussion starter would be to kind of circle back around to some of the student questions. As you guys are observing and writing your questions down of things that you've noticed, things that you still aren't very clear about, I'm wondering if we can start with a classroom of something they wrote down as they watched the film, maybe an observation or a question they might have about maybe why are we focusing on these Navajo Steel Gang?
Let's start with Frazier.
Yeah. I see some hands.
Would you repeat the question for them, please?
Yeah, I'm curious, what are some observations you made about the film and a question you might have for Sarah Dell or Mike Jetty?
What's the purpose of you making this video?
Oh, no. I can answer that. I can actually. It's kind of a straightforward one as well, because as Native people, we're constantly stereotyped, and the stereotypes they're twofold. Some are positive stereotypes. If a stereotype can be positive, and sometimes they're negative. And I thought about how I didn't want people to see the next Native that they saw in a gas station in oil-stained overalls or pants to think that they were panhandling. I wanted them to think this person just got off of a 17-hour shift and they are working on the largest transportation system in the world. I wanted to break down that stereotype that we are hard workers and we come from a long legacy of workers. So I think that that's what I wanted to be able to show, is that we come from a very strong system, that we come from our culture, and that's what is getting these guys through. But stereotypes don't see that. They kind of show something else, and you don't think of natives as railroad workers. So I wanted to somehow just put that into a viewer's mind.
Yeah, and I love that. Thanks for asking that question, and I love the scene where, I don't know if you guys noticed, but where she has the different scenes of traveling down the road, different weather, there's different times of day, it's early in the morning, it's late at night, and I think it shows, I'm wondering if a class can maybe tell me why she might have used a segment like this to show this transfer of time. Do you think their days are long or short, just based on this? Maybe another class can tell me what they observed. Cut bank?
Long days or short days? You can answer.
Long days. Yes. And Sarah Dell, I'm wondering, maybe you can describe that a little bit more. You spent a lot of time with these workers and you've gotten to know their families. Can you talk to the students a little bit about this, how long their days are, when you started in the day and when you ended, and getting
I can do that. So they have two different types of systems where they work. Sometimes they're working 5 days straight and then they get 2 days off. But that means that they are actually traveling. So say if you guys are in Montana, so imagine this. Imagine that you're working for 5 days down in Texas and you get 2 days off to go home. So that means that you have to travel all the way down to Texas to go to work for 5 days, and then you travel back. But your travel time is actually part of going back and forth. So you're actually home for maybe 24 hours, maybe. And that gives you enough time to change your clothes, wash them, maybe get one good night's sleep in your bed, and then you get back on the road and go back to work. So that was one kind of system where they were working all the time, less than 24 hours sometimes at home. Another type of work schedule is where they would work 8 days straight, and then they would have 6 days off. So 8 days straight. But again, their travel time is part of their days off. So if they're traveling from, like, say, Washington State to Texas to go home, because all of them want to go home after work, part of their travel time is going home. So a good part of their travel is literally on the road with their travel partner, and that becomes their family. You know, because they're not spending a lot of time at home, they're on the road so much with whoever they decide to share a drive with. They would work in all hours, and also the railroad is outside, right? So there is no cover for them, so they're outside in the elements. So they're out in rain, they're out in snow, they're out in the heat, if you imagine in the desert, you know, in the hot sun. So they are traveling all year round, and they're also traveling at different times of the day, because sometimes the railroad needs to travel at certain times during the day in the busiest times of the city. And so the railroad workers can't work during the day, so the railroad workers have to work at night. And so that makes their schedule, you know, they're sleeping during the day to be able to work at night. So they have crazy, crazy schedules, and it shifts. You know, every week is different, and every location is different. So it's kind of a really wild type of job, because they're constantly on the move, constantly moving, and they have, they're just traveling. I mean, they've become so good at traveling that they just pick up and go, and they don't need much sleep. They fuel themselves on gas station food. You know, they love gas station coffee. Gets them through, and they keep going. It's amazing to watch. It really is.
Yeah, I was really surprised when I first watched the film how many days out of the year they are on the road versus when they're home. And I had asked before we watched the clip, I'm curious if anybody had picked up on, I know that the clip I showed, we followed the Long family, and Clifford, I think his name is, kind of walks us through his house, and there's a real sense of pride in family and having ownership of, you know, your land and community. I'm curious if any other classrooms picked up on, made any other observations, what seemed to matter to the Long family, especially having family on the railroad. Notes that you made about watching the film and what you noticed about the Long family and some of their values?
Well, Brianna, what did you notice about the values? And then Tayden, you can ask your question. Yeah. So, when you watch the film, come and stand over here. You can
with your paper.
Hurry now, because there's a lot of time. So, go ahead.
When I watched the clips, I felt sad for their families because they had to stay a lot of time away from them.
You knew what the family was what?
Missing them so much.
The family was really important.
As family was really important inside of work.
Yeah. So it's kind of sacrifice. But you noticed no dice for the other day, remember? You said that. The real sacrifice. Yeah. Good. We had another question that Dave thought from what you were talking about before. Tayden?
How long time did they get to eat a day?
How many times did they get to eat a day? They were concerned with how often they ate.
Okay.
And also,
good concerns.
And then the other student was concerned with what else? How often they did what?
Do they get sad they don't get to be at home so much?
Those are concerns in a flower class. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the questions, guys. So the first one is they did get very sad, and I think that that's part of the problem of having a job away from home. Is they would miss lots of activities. Like they would miss being able to go to the school to pick up their kids or to meet the school teachers. They would miss if their kid had a basketball game. They would miss certain things, And they couldn't do anything about that. So that was tough because they were choosing to earn money to be able to provide for the family. So that is the hard part about the life that they're trying to work for, to provide. So I think that when the workers are out, they keep thinking about their family to keep them going. It's like that's what gives them their strength, is to be able to know that they're doing good for their families. What was the first question? I'm sorry. The first one was about
their food when they get to eat it.
So, in the morning time, they say that breakfast was the most important because they didn't know when they were going to be eating lunchtime. They were going to get 30 minutes for lunch. And that they couldn't go off to a restaurant for lunch. They don't have time. Usually they're sitting right beside the track with a backpack and they're eating their snacks out of the bag. The snacks they buy usually at the gas station or they buy at the grocery store. If they're lucky, their family will send them with some food that will last them a couple of days, and then they'll take leftovers. That's what would happen a lot. But their most important meal was breakfast. And they really were hoping to find something that's warm to eat, but a lot of times things aren't open at 3 in the morning. So they actually don't really get a big breakfast. They just get whatever they can find, on the way to the work site. And then when they get off of work, there's a clip in the movie that shows them at a Mexican restaurant. So they actually get to go and eat out. There was also a woman, a railroad worker, who would, her mom would come to the motel and she would make fry bread in the motel room and sell it. And so she would make food for all the other railroad workers and they loved that. Or she would make burritos and sell it because that's home cooked food and that's what they miss. I know, snowplow. So the most important thing is the home cooked meal. That's what they miss. They appreciate that and they miss that, is the home cooked meal. It's okay, puppy.
Great questions. And I think that there's a lot to be said about food and community and what we find and what we get nostalgic for. I'd also like to kind of bring in Mike Jetty a little bit into this conversation. I know in the film they mention this paternalistic triangle between the trading posts, the railroad retirement board, and the railroads, and this kind of use of the Navajo Nation is almost this kind of labor pool. As far as this history between Navajo Nation and the American government, Mike, I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of background on this. How much this was kind of a consensual relationship? What was it? How forced was it? Maybe you can give us a brief history and maybe show us some of your slides.
Sure. Well, ahabitaki yapi ihani wastedo, yuha chante waste nape chuzapado. Hello, my relatives. It's a good morning, and I greet all of you with a heartfelt handshake. And it's really been a cool experience to be part of these film projects, and I really enjoyed the film you made, and it helped open my eyes a little bit to a story I'd never heard about. I've heard about different Native American communities and work crews. Like, show of hands out there, how many of you have ever heard about the Mohawk iron workers that worked on skyscrapers in New York City? That's another untold story about Native Americans and stuff. But regarding the Navajo, or the Dene, I did a little research, and I read a paper of one of the people actually featured in the film that was one of the guys interviewed about his research on the Navajo railroad workers, and that was fascinating. But in my research, I thought I'd just share a few slides to give you a context of the Navajo Nation, and we'll see if this works. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. Maybe give it a second.
How about now?
Nope.
Nope.
If
any
of the classes can see the slides, sometimes they can see them.
We can. Fraser's good.
We're good.
Oh, okay. You guys can see. We can't. You're fine then.
Great.
Oh,
Then
okay.
go right ahead.
Well, one of the things, this film fits in perfect with our state law called Indian Education for All, which says we're going to learn about American Indians in a culturally responsive manner. And that's really why I like being part of this discussion, because it's Native American filmmakers sharing their own story, and that's what being culturally responsive is we hear the voice of Native peoples and Native filmmakers. And this fits in with our essential understandings regarding Montana Indians. And one of them, and you mentioned this about stereotypes, is who are Native people today? And we've heard, or I have anyway, and probably many of you, negative stereotypes about American Indians. And so what was cool to me is see, when they got ready in the morning, there was prayers in Navajo that were said to, ask for a good day. And I think some folks even, blessed themselves with corn pollen and maybe, offer tobacco or say a prayer, and some other, like for a Christian prayer or something. So there's a whole range of folks that are Navajo that work on these crews. But to give you a sense of the Navajo Nation, they're the largest reservation in the United States. And you think about it, they cover Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, 27,000 square miles. And so that's a huge, huge area that these folks come from. And they are the second largest tribal nation with over 250,000 members. What you've seen here is a clip of a group of Navajo that have committed themselves to provide for their family through working on the railroad. It's kind of an untold story. And so here you can see the the Navajo reservation and how big it is. And the Hopi reservation sits within the Navajo reservation, which is very interesting. But it's a huge, huge area, and so these folks come from all over, to work on the railroads, and it was a great story. But that there's that historic relationship with the government and the states with the Navajo, and it's fascinating to me that the government reached out to the Navajo to help them on the reservations. But even so, like the railroad companies, still don't, I think offer benefits, and that kind of came up in the film too. And so, this was an untold story that I had never heard of, but, I think it's good for all of us to hear these stories from Native perspectives. So I just kind of wanted to offer that out. But you talked about food. Is my screen still up? I want to stop sharing my screen. There we go. Is the screen, can you see me now?
Can the classes see Mike? Yes?
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up? Great.
But, thinking about food and Navajo, do you know what the Navajo elder said the first time he saw a pizza? He said, "Who threw up on the fry bread?"
Sorry, Sarah Dell, this is Mike.
You know what it's been hard for me to understand is Bannock. I don't understand Bannock because you guys have Bannock up there, right? In Montana?
Can you explain what Bannock is to the students?
Because they talk about that, because in Montreal they do talk about Bannock as fry bread, and it in my mind goes
Well, the way my family would make that, they call it like flatbread. But it's just, you make it in a frying pan, and you don't use oil. And so it's a little flatter, a little drier than fried bread, where that fried bread's kind of, a little greasier. And so, that's kind of, it's similar, it looks similar, but it's got a different texture. And so, so it's not quite as greasy, I guess. So, but it still tastes good.
It's definitely a comfort food that a lot of the would really want to go back to. That's what they talk about, the things that they miss, and it's the comfort food they miss, like the corn stew, the inishbiji, the different things that they can't get anywhere else. It's very specific to us, and that's nice. That's a nice. It's a long relationship you have with food, throughout your life. And so for a lot of the railroad workers, they would like to travel to different places, and they compare the different foods, and they would talk about, various things, and they were like, Bannock. They're just... So it was very funny the way that they would, like I said, inventory. They compare the different places, the different types of food they would have, because that's what would keep them happy.
One of my goals in life is to become like a piece of fried bread. Round, brown, and greasy. So,
Oh my
one of my friends said I got the greasy part down, so working on the other two.
I'm curious if any students might be able to give us a few examples of foods that they eat that are traditional to their culture or their family, where they feel this sense of family or nostalgia for. Maybe Fraser, do you want to start? Anybody want to give us?
Yeah. So when you were talking about your Bannock, is that what you say, Bannock? I asked him if they had an equivalent here. Hey, yeah, what about puppy soup?
Yeah, we eat puppies.
Oh. It's true, we eat puppies. No,
We talk about cooking this dog all the time. Like, one of these days, she keeps barking, we're gonna cook her.
So, but they have what was the other bread that you were talking about?
Gabubu bread.
The boo-boo bread or
Gabubu.
Gabubu bread. Sorry.
Gabubu. Gabubu. Gabubu.
So can you hear them? They're like.
Oh, white bread. It's very similar to Bannock bread.
Bannock bone. But fry bread is big here, during Native American Week in September, I called it Thigh Bread Week because we got a lot of fried bread, and so it was like so good it's hard to pass up. What is one of your favorite traditionals besides fried bread?
Puppy soup. Indian taco.
Indian taco. Gingerbread soup.
Honestly, puppy soup. Cow tongue. Pretty good. Yeah, cow tongue too.
I just want to comment on what Mike had talked about with the untold story. My dad was a railroad engineer, so I understand crazy hours of railroad life, and I'm familiar with work gangs, but up here in the north. Can you please be quiet? Thank you. Excuse me. So I'm familiar with the work gangs in the north, but I had no idea to the extent that they were in the south and who worked them. So it even, I love that perspective of it, that you don't think how it's happening. How does it get done?
Do you guys have a rail line that goes through your community?
Oh yes, Montana was built by the railroads.
Well, everything in the Southwest. Anything west. Everything was kind of given over to the railroads. We were put on reservations.
So we have Highway 2. We're up on the High Line, and so the railroad runs straight across the northern border. You take it all the way over to Williston, down to Grand Forks.
Is it Union Pacific?
BNSF.
Okay.
BNSF.
Okay.
But it wasn't always BNSF. Okay, so you had northern lines and southern lines, and you had the Santa Fe, New Mexico, Santa Fe.
They merged.
Trail. Yeah, they all merged. They all changed over time, but Amtrak runs the High Line. It doesn't run any of the rail lines in the southern part of the state. So we have rail cars coming through with coal, oil, weeds, straight from Seattle all the way across. So it's kind of our little towns were built with ranching and railroading, a lot of them up here.
Yeah.
So
we have a question.
We have a question from the live stream. We have some participants who are wondering, was there anything that you learned that surprised you while making the movie?
Did you hear that?
I did. Well, there were a lot of things that surprised me. I think finding the female Navajo railroad worker, I called her my unicorn, because I was so shocked that she was out here. She left her son. He was 5 years old. She was a single mom, and she went out there and was working alongside the men, and then worked herself into a position where she was the timekeeper of this group. I mean, that is a lot of dedication, you know, because she basically had to forfeit being a mother, and she kind of became the mother of the gang, you know, so she was very sort of nurturing to the individuals on the gang. And that was a surprise to me, to see, like I said, I call her the unicorn. Jennifer continues to be, you know, she is beloved by the men on that gang. I think another thing that really surprised me was the widespread numbers. How many Navajos have worked on the railroad? It seemed like as soon as you pay attention to it, there were railroad workers, relatives, people that you knew, uncles, cousins, grandpas. And it's like once you are actually aware of something, then you start to see the connections. And there are huge connections, huge families. And you see that there was a whole system. That surprised me is we talked about the paternalistic triangle. That was so well maintained. You know, the federal government, the trading posts, how they used our reservation for labor. If someone got hurt, they would just replace them, you know, and find someone else. And then it was just a constant shipping them out all over the place. And the fact that no one was able to get benefits. You know, these men are sacrificing their limbs sometimes, you know, so you get hurt because it's very dangerous work. That was hard to see. That surprised me, is that the workers, they kept working. They kept going back. You know, they kept going to do that job even though it probably was too dangerous or it took too much of a toll. And that is, I think, it surprised me to see that happening over and over again in different parts of our reservation. It was across the board.
Yeah, I think you do a really great job. I don't know if all of the students were able to see the film, but Sarah Dell does a beautiful job of following different families throughout the film and showing that though they are very diverse and different, family is very important. There's some underlying traditions and levels of importance that are kind of follow through with a lot of the families, the Carter family, the Long family, and the Sandoval family. And I think that making a short film, it's hard to put all that in 30 minutes or so, but it's pretty impressive, and I think it says a lot to the community.
You know, there was one thing that really actually shocked me is going to Clifford's house, because when he said he was building his house, I'm thinking, okay, he's building a house. But on paper, if you look at what it takes to build a house, you know, you try to figure out that you've got a floor plan, you've got an architect, you have lots of things that you're supposed to do. He wasn't doing that. He didn't draw anything out. You know how he built his stairs? He went to Home Depot and took a look at it, measured it, took one of those samples home, and then copied it. And that's how he built his stairs. Like, there was no, like, I couldn't believe it. And then you go to his house, it's a 2-story house on the reservation. I mean, it was a huge house, huge. It is a massive house. It's like a giant mansion, and he's building it on his time off. That is mind-blowing. On his time off from the railroad, he and his brothers are doing that. All of them have like different skills. Some of them are electricians. Some of them are doing like journeyman work. And they're doing it together. And it's like, holy cow. And he didn't have the money to pay someone else to do it. He was doing everything himself. And what he did not know how to do, he figured out how to do it. That was surprising. That was totally surprising. Like, there should be a film just on Clifford.
Maybe that could be your next project. We would definitely love to watch it here at the Film Club. Okay, so we're kind of sadly running out of time here. I think we have time for one more question from one of the classes on our live stream. Kathleen, did you have one in your...
Yeah, we had a question about, you've mentioned a couple times that they don't get benefits, and the class was pretty surprised at that. So does the financial compensation it must make it worth it. So they're just wondering a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
Okay,
I know
so
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, okay, so structural violence refers to like systemic ways where social structures harm individuals, meaning that there are systems in place that hurt and do not help disadvantaged people. And so when the railroad workers would go to get a job on the railroad, the railroad companies would hire so many people that they would only give them maybe 3 months of work. And you need, say, 10 months of work in a year to qualify. So each year that they're not working enough hours or enough time to qualify for benefits. And you need 30 years of benefits to be able to qualify for retirement. And that is like, it sounds like, well, it's impossible to get, really. So the same people who are working in an office and the same people who are doing outside manual labor, they have to do the same amount of time. But their workload and what they're expected is uneven. You know, one side is outside all the time. It's hard on their body. It's dangerous. They're in the elements. As opposed to someone who's sitting, I'm sorry, no offense, at a desk, and they're in an office, and they're warm, and they're able to have, I guess, a safe employment environment. Whereas the railroad out in the elements is not safe. So if they get hurt, they will not be able to qualify for benefits because they didn't put in enough time. You have to put in your time. That was what was constantly, I got to put in my time. I'm just doing my time. And they have to do so many hours per week, so many hours per month, and it all adds up into a calendar year. And if you fall short of that, you get benefits for that year. So you may have to work, say, 5 years to actually make up maybe 2 years of benefits that'll apply towards benefits. We had one man who he said that he worked for over 30 years. You know, and he was an older man. He was Carter's father, Thomas Carter's father, but he didn't qualify for benefits, whereas his brother did. And so Thomas's family went into the Railroad Retirement Board and said, you know, why did our father not require, or why did he not receive benefits? And they said that he had earned less than 5 years on the railroad, in which he thought he had worked 20 plus years, 30 years. They said that if you add up all those months together, it didn't make up 5 years. And so it was confusing for people who thought, okay, they're working on the railroad, the benefits. So the system was not set up, one, to explain how they're going to earn benefits, but also how to maintain it and what happens if they get injured. You know, so there were a lot of things that that have happened that have prevented Navajos from being able to continue to work for the railroad. They just made a new, it's not relatively new, it's about maybe 2 or 3 years old, where you cannot get hired by the railroad unless you live 180 miles near a railroad. So you have to live near, in the reservation where we are, the Union Pacific, the closest one is down in New Mexico. And a lot of them don't live 180 miles near the railroad, so they can't be hired. So it's like these new systems that are being put in place are not going to help us to get new jobs, and we need new jobs. We're good workers, but they're creating these new sort of rules which are going to prevent us from participating. And so that's why this story is kind of like a snapshot in this special time period. Because we're not going to be able to have a steel gang made up of Navajos anymore.
Yeah, and I just want to mention also in the film, when you introduce a new subject, there is that number at the bottom that says the amount of months versus out of a certain amount of months. And I'm assuming that is when they can obtain their benefits. And that's what that number
300. Means. Yeah, 300. Yeah, 300 months.
Which is
imagine
huge.
300 months.
Yeah, I think it's hard for most of us to wrap our head around because that shows the loopholes in the systems and it's especially with manual labor jobs. And on that note, I think I have run out of time, sadly, for this wonderful and productive film club. I would love to thank Mike Jetty, Indian Education Specialist, and Sarah Dell for joining us, and all the classes that were able to tune in. And I would love if anybody has any extra questions or made some special observations, if they could write it down, feel free to email it to us and we can send it off to Sarah Dell or Mike, and they would, I'm sure, be happy to answer those questions, because you guys had some really awesome questions, made some really smart observations, and this has been a lot of fun, and I think everybody's learned a little bit today. I know I have. So
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity to share the story with you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for all the classes, and I'm not sure if you or Mike has any closing remarks as we say goodbye for our final film club. There's one last thing I would like to mention before we head out. So, yeah, Mike, do you want to say anything?
I do have something. Sarah Dell, it's nice to hear you greet us in Navajo. Yak eh. Did I say that correct?
Yeah, it's close. Yeah.
It's more than just a greeting. It's kind of asking how your whole essence is today. Everything about you.
Yeah, when you like something, you say "Shishyat eh." I like it.
Yeah. And so one of my Navajo friends said, though, that's a greeting, yak eh. But then when you guys say good night, you say hit hey.
No, we don't. No, we don't. Funny.
He is funny.
I'm gonna have to think some other comeback for Blackfeet.
Yeah, Mike always has a few jokes up his sleeve. Note to leave on is a good joke. I just wanted to mention one more thing before we leave, is that one of our Big Sky events that's coming up this next month in February is our Big Sky Documentary Film Festival. And we do partner with Inspired Classroom, who has allowed us and so generously helped us with this video conferencing. We do work with a few classrooms to interact with filmmakers during the film festival. So if there are any teachers or classrooms out there that want to participate, feel free to send me an email or show us any interest online on our website. So it sounds like you guys would be great for continuing the conversation.
I think they're excited about that.
Yeah, I see some hands waving. So on that note, thanks again for joining us, and maybe we'll see you during the film festival. And thank you, Sarah Dell and Mike. Hopefully we'll talk soon.